James Lupton. We're here for the Fighter podcast. Today's episode, I'm joined with Andy Clarke, and we're talking about Matt Macklin, somebody who you work closely with now, someone you get on with very, very well also. Firstly, talk to me. Do you remember the first time you met Matt Macklin?
Yeah, so the interesting thing about doing this for me is that I've kind of learned about and heard about Macklin's career in most detail after the event because I was aware of him when he started boxing, and I would say I followed him in particular particularly closely, but he was a kind of rising star, only a bit younger than me, and I always have anyway. When you're on your way up, when you're growing up, you kind of tend to pay attention to people who are roughly the same age. I think that's kind of natural. But as for the finer points of the career, I only really started to get to grips with those when we started to work together. The first time I met him would have been around 2012, something like that, 2011, 2012. He just boxed Sturm, I think. And then he was going into that fight with Sergio Martinez, and he was doing media stuff by then already. So, yeah, it would have been around then, about 10 years ago, basically.
And like I say, you now work very closely with Matt. You do your co-commentaries together. He seems to have crossed over after retirement very well, whereas we see a lot of fighters who do struggle post-retirement from their career in the ring. Is that something that Matt's ever spoken to you about? Has he found it easy? How easy is Matt to work with for you?
He's really easy to work with. I don't think he found it easy when he stopped boxing. I don't think any fighter really does, to be honest. And we've spoken about it on the podcast reasonably often. We talked about it off air, privately, if you like, quite a lot, because I think when any athlete stops doing whatever it is that they're doing, and they never want to kind of sensationalize it or compare it to something that it's really not. But it in a way, it is a bit like a bereavement. I don't know if you saw that clip with Kell Brook the other week, and he was in the gym and he just said that he feels lost at the minute without boxing. He doesn't really know what his purpose is. He doesn't really know who he is at the minute. And I think they all go through that. And Macklin definitely did, because I think he had a couple of years where he didn't really do a lot. His media career was kind of getting off the ground, but he was in that kind of fog where you're looking for the next thing, but you're just still trying to come to terms with the realization that whatever that next thing is, it's not going to be nearly as good as what you've just finished doing. And I think it takes a bit of time for people to understand that. Really, quite a lot of footballers I used to work with actually back in the day, after they retired, they just couldn't go to football for 2 or 3 years. They didn't want to be in the media because they just kept thinking, I used to play in these games, and now I'm just sat here. And being sat there for me is amazing because it's as close as I'll get. But for them, it's a distant second best. So I think he was always good at it. I always thought he was good at it as soon as we started doing it, and I kind of unusually good at it in that if you got the confidence to kind of speak in public, which is basically what it is, then you're off to a good start. And not that many people have that. If you've got the ability to kind of articulate yourself and explain yourself, again, that's another kind of step on the ladder. And again, not everybody has that, particularly anyone with a kind of what you might describe as a God-given ability, whether it's sporting or musical or whatever it is, they can struggle to explain exactly how it is that they did what they did and they knew how to do it and get it across in simple terms. So you need to be able to do that, and he can do that. And he was always able to do it. So yeah, it was a pretty natural transition for him. But like everybody I know, really, after he stopped boxing, it took a while before you just kind of, I think you kind of grieve the end of your career a bit, to be honest. And it takes a while before you can really move on.
You mentioned about the footballers, and they feel it's the second best is doing the punditry role. Have you ever been in a position with Matt where you felt that from him? Has he been there ringside, and has he almost visibly seemed like he's missing it, or he wishes he was in there?
Not really, actually. Not really. I think boxing is kind of different because it's so hard. That every time you get in the ring, there is the potential for a lot of serious pain, and I don't think they missed that. I really don't think they missed that. And I think when they see a hard fight, they might think to begin with, the adrenaline's flowing, and they're thinking, God, they're just that cut and thrust of competition. I'd love that. I'd love to be able to do that again. And then they remind themselves, but that what comes with that, which isn't necessarily true of other sports. So I think boxers are less prone to that than athletes from other disciplines. I mean, every sport brings its difficulties, and you generally tend to forget them. I guess when you're looking back on things, but with boxers, I think it's always pretty close to the surface. But when you ask fighters, does that make you wish that you were still in there? What they'll generally say is, well, for about a round it did, and then I remembered, what they're actually going through, and just thought, nah, not for me, not for me anymore. So no, I don't think so. I don't think so. Not really. I mean, I'll catch him kind of shifting in his seat and kind of throwing the odd punch and slipping and rolling a bit sometimes, when we're watching a really, really good fight. But I don't think he really wishes that he was still doing it. I think another thing that's hard for fighters is it's not so much that they can't do it anymore, but they look back on what they did. Or rather, what they don't really do is look back on what they did and what they achieved. They tend to look back on what they didn't do and what they wish they had, and they're quite hard on themselves. And I think that takes a while for them to be happy with what they achieved and be happy with their career and be at peace with it, because there's always things that you wanted to do which you didn't do. And in Matt's case, it was he should have been a world champion because he beat Felix Sturm that night. And I don't know anyone who doesn't think he won that fight. Sometimes you see things crowned as or coined as robberies, and then you watch it and you think, I don't know. I could see how that happened. I could see how it could have gone either way, but not that one. I don't really know anyone who doesn't think he won that fight. So I think it took him a while to probably just make his peace with that, because he then went on to have Sergio Martinez, who at that point was pretty supersonic, and then Golovkin, who at the stage he met him absolutely was. Nobody wanted to fight him at that point. And you look at fighters like him, and Martin Murray would be another good example, who got the same three guys, and had another couple of tilts at it as well. Sometimes you need the rub of the green, really, with things like that. And some people get it and some people don't. And that's one of the things about boxing, isn't it? It doesn't really, what you deserve and what you get, they're not really, that equation just doesn't really, if you invest in that too much, I think you're always going to end up disappointed.
So I'll touch on, first you mentioned the Felix Sturm fight. Like you say, time robbery gets thrown around too much. This certainly, was the case, really. It's a strong case for robbery in this event. Does Matt have any bitterness towards it at all? Does he ever speak about that in a bad way, or does he have any, sort of bad thoughts or bad stories about that at all?
No, not really. I think if you'd asked him not that long after he retired, then maybe you would have got a different answer. But not if he did, then he doesn't anymore, because the only good thing about having something like that happen to you when it's a big fight and it's on TV is everybody knows. So everyone in the boxing world knows. You can't put the captured former world champion under his name when he turns up on the TV, but people know. And anyone who watched that, they're fully aware. And it was on American TV, I think. I think it might have been on Epix, or anyway, it got a widespread audience. And he does talk about how he had a great camp for that fight, had a great celebration afterwards, that everything was there. He was really proud of his performance, did everything he could possibly have done. The only thing that didn't work out was the scores that the judges returned at ringside. So not really. I think he, like I say, it might have taken him a while, but these days, no, it's not something he really dwells on. And actually, he knows that in the context of his career, that the attention that defeat, as it has to go down as, because that's what it is, it's in the books, the defeat, the attention that gathered for him, that basically led him to get a deal to go and fight in America, which kicked him onto his next phase of his career, where he made some really good money. And if he'd won, maybe that wouldn't have happened. It's funny the way these things work out.
Absolutely. Another thing you mentioned as well, you said he's a natural on the mic. Excuse me. He's made that transition very smoothly. Do you find it easier when you're working alongside somebody who has competed at that sport in terms of their knowledge and in terms of seeing things that you may not see with other guys who you work with?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. With that kind of role, what you're looking at really is you have, or on a commentary team, you'll have a version of me where you're the lead broadcaster, if you like, and you're steering the ship, and you'll have somebody next to you, a former practitioner, or sometimes two. I've done jobs where it hasn't been a former boxer, and that can work. That can work well. I've done amateur stuff with Big Ron McIntosh, for example, where we'll kind of take it in turns. One will lead and the other will do the analysis. And we've been watching boxing for a long time, and I think Ron's brilliant at that. So that it can work without somebody having been a top level performer, but inevitably, if they have been one and they've got that ability to kind of articulate what it is that they're watching, then it does work better. And they also just have that little bit more gravitas, that bit more credibility comes with having been in there. And particularly when you encounter slightly ticklish situations, such as a fighter appearing to quit, maybe, when you've got a discussion around something like that. I don't really feel like that is a word I can bandy around myself, having not boxed. It's the only kind of situation where I would feel that it wouldn't be right for me to comment, because obviously I feel like I could comment on it, or I wouldn't be doing the job. But with something like that, I think you do need to have done it to be able to make a real judgment on that, because it's, in our world, that's a serious thing to say about somebody. So yeah, I think you do. I think ideally you do need the person next to you to have been in there, because they just know things you don't know.
Absolutely. You mentioned earlier you have a podcast also with Matt Macklin. How different is it to work on the podcast with him compared to a broadcast?
Yeah, it's pretty different, because you've just got loads of time to go into things. When you're commentating, you're very much in the moment. Things move quick, and depending on how the rhythm of the fight is, you can get into a bit more of an in-depth discussion about certain things. But at a moment's notice, everything can change, and that conversation can be cut short, never to be revisited, because that's just what happens a lot of the time. And one thing you learn doing what I do, my part of it, is that you don't really ever want to veer away from the action for long at all, if ever, really. Like, you can have little bits of information you throw in and little discussion points, but they can never really take you away from it for more than 10 seconds or so. That's my kind of rule. I think you just need to be concentrating on what's happening in front of you. Not everybody does that, and it does frustrate me a bit. That's another discussion. But the podcast is great, because you've just got ages to talk about boxing and just everything that goes on around it. And it just is so fascinating. It's just a fascinating sport from every possible angle. The psychology of it, the mentality surrounding it, the ups and downs, what fighters go through. It can turn into a really quite deep, almost sort of existential discussion sometimes. And he's really happy to go there, Macklin, always. He's totally happy to talk about doubts and fears and vulnerabilities and all that kind of thing. And most fighters are, actually, you'll find, when they finished. And I just love all of that, because it is a very odd way to earn a living when you think about it. Very, very unusual. I mean, in a sense, it's as old as time itself. The idea that you literally fight for your livelihood, not metaphorically either, literally. But it's strange, isn't it? I can't imagine doing it myself. And I think that's one of the many things I find so interesting about it. And he's just great on all of that. And another thing that really helps with the podcast is that he's very, very well connected, Macklin. He knows basically everybody. So really, there are very few people we can't get.
Do you see a different Matt Macklin when you're doing a podcast compared to when you're doing a broadcast?
Yeah, kind of, but just for the reasons I just mentioned, you've got more time to get into things. But he's very consistent, really, in kind of in how he is, and that's great because I like to think I'm like that. People who are like that are just much easier to deal with. Athletes aren't always, they can be quite up and down, quite highly strung sometimes, quite like anyone really. We can all be hard work at times, I suppose, but he's not like that. He's not like that. He's really easy to deal with pretty much all of the time, and you get it in a kind of shorter, sweeter capsule, if you like, when you're doing commentary, but it's the same really. He's got a good sense of humor, and I think that's really important, because we know each other well. You can have a bit of fun with each other. You never want to turn it into some awful banter session. That's Jesus. I mean, that kind of approach, makes me shudder. But at the same time, if you do get on, I think it's definitely a plus, because sport's supposed to be fun, and I know boxing is as serious as it can. It's as serious a sport as it gets in many ways, but all of the other stuff that goes on around it a lot of the time, it's fun. Like boxing is like the traveling circus. That's kind of what I always say about it, with all these characters and all these things. And there is a lot of room for kind of for a lighter touch and a bit of humor in there, and just genuine kind of passion and excitement, because we all know that when things do get really serious in there, then you've got to treat it with the greatest of solemnity. But other than that, outside of that, it is entertainment. Sport is entertainment, and I think sometimes, just generally sports coverage, people can take it a bit too seriously. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't take what you're doing seriously, but does that make sense? You're watching something and you want people to enjoy it, don't you? And I think if the two people who are bringing it to you obviously kind of get on and are enjoying themselves, then it's that's a good thing.
Absolutely. You mentioned there it's an entertainment business. Sport is meant to be entertaining. Tell me the most entertaining or the funniest story of Macklin.
Oh God, there's quite a few of these. So it's just a question of which ones.
Which first comes to mind? Just a couple.
The first, well, the best one probably is one that John Pegg told on Macklin's take. If you want to hear it in full, then basically you just need to go back to the first episode we did with John Pegg, which is like, it'll be, I don't know, it's probably in the first 20 episodes we did, maybe the first 10 or 15. And it's just a story about how John, they've known each other for a long time. So basically, John doesn't drink, right? And so John's Macklin very much used to. He doesn't anymore. And John used to have this service around Birmingham, which was, I think he just called it dial a drink or something like that. So if you ran out of booze when you got home or whatever, and the off license is shut, and back in the day, these things used to happen. Everywhere stays open forever now, but that didn't used to be the case. So you could ring up John basically, and he would always just have a load ready to go in his garage or whatever, and he would drive it around. And yeah, he tells a really good story about Macklin calling him late at night one time, and John going around to deliver this stuff and not being able to find him, and then somehow hearing some noise down an alleyway and finding Macklin outside in freezing cold weather, kind of shadow boxing in his pants, and then just not really understanding why John was there or what was going on. He tells it a lot. He tells it a lot better than that. And the other one, again, this comes courtesy of John Pegg, is Mumbagate, Samantha Mumba. So he boxed in Dublin once, Matt, and Samantha Mumba was there, who people probably would recognise the name. But anyway, she was a singer and she was hot. No, no other way to describe her really. And after his fight, Macklin had won. I can't remember who was boxing, and apparently she was, she was very impressed with him. And if he just even remotely played his cards right, then one thing would have led to another there. But he managed to fuck it up because he was too busy having some kind of bromance with another Irish fighter called John Duddy, and to the point where she just gave up and went home. So we bring that one up quite a lot. But there's a lot of stories about Macklin, most of which he's pretty happy. Oh, there was a good one he told us about boxing. This was with Paul Smith, about boxing at the junior tournament. No, it can't have been a junior tournament. At the youth tournament in Bulgaria when they were all on the England squads together. Yeah, and that evening, taking quite an interesting course. There's plenty, and most of them he's kind of happy. He's kind of happy to tell, but I'll give you them because they have been told on a public platform before. I don't think I could really divulge ones. I can't really give you any exclusives just in case, just in case they weren't ever meant for publication.
That's it, not for anyone else's ears. The last question from me. You know Matt very well. If he wasn't doing what he's doing now, if he wasn't involved in boxing, what would he be doing?
I think he's kind of always, well, he was a manager to start with. If he wasn't involved in boxing at all, I don't think that was ever likely to happen because he's been doing it so long and he, he's just so into it, every aspect of it. I don't know. I don't know what he'd be doing if he decided to make a complete breakaway from it. A bit like Frotchy's got some property interests and stuff like that. But I think that's really just a way of keeping some steady income coming in. I don't think it's something that he's like massively passionate about. So I think it always would have been sport, something like that. I could imagine him if, like Bernard Dunn, for example, he was another really good Irish fighter. He went into the fitness side and kind of he's worked with GAA teams like hurling teams and Gaelic football teams working on the fitness side and getting involved in their setups. I could imagine him doing something like that because he's into all of that. He played all of that when he was young. But with the boxing, he was always going to stay. And he was a manager to start with. I think he found that a bit too 24/7 because dealing with Europe and the USA and those time zones, I don't think you're ever kind of off the clock. And if you want to do it properly, then you have to be prepared to respond to WhatsApps at 4 o'clock in the morning. That's just how that business is. And I think he's kind of thought about training at times. A couple of times he's come close. I think he came close with Joe Ward, Irish standout amateur who's turned pro a little while ago. But again, I remember talking to Andy about this, Andy Lee, and before Andy started training, and they were both saying that, they did kind of fancy it, but they knew that they needed to find someone who was as committed as they were, or it was just a non-starter. And were they really prepared for it to kind of take over their life because they knew that it would, because that's just how they are. And Andy's done it and Matt hasn't. And I still wouldn't rule that out, but I think as time passes, I think he enjoys the media side of it. I wouldn't be surprised if a promoter I think it'd be quite hard to tempt him away from the media side, but I wouldn't be surprised I wouldn't be surprised at all if this has already happened actually. But if a major promoter just wanted to kind of prize him away and have him as their chief strategist or something like that, because he'd be really good at that, because he is so well connected and his career it's a really interesting career that took him in lots of different directions. Lots of things went right, plenty of things went wrong. Some of them were his fault, plenty of them weren't. He's seen a lot. And to be honest, like whenever I talk to him about what do you think is going to happen in this scenario, or if we're trying to forecast this or that, or what might happen or what might not happen, more than anyone else I know, most of the time he's right.
Perfect. Andy, I want to thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining me once again. on the podcast.
No problem.